Well, good morning, everyone. I hope that today you are healthy and that you're safe and that you are feeling the presence of God. I think right now we're in the 6th month of this pandemic where just the rhetoric and energy for the election coming up is really starting to ignite. And I'm sure we're in for the next couple of months should be pretty wild. And it's important that we maintain perspective, I think, during this time and realize that this moment in time, as chaotic as it feels, that it is just a moment in time and we'll get through it. Now, I'm saying that to myself as much as I am to you. In the lectionary passage today, I think it gets to the heart of why it's so important to keep persevering in seeking God's presence in our lives. No matter what religion you are, no matter what circumstances you are, it's part of our task of living is to seek beyond ourselves, to connect with that greater perspective and greater power. The story goes today, it is that Jesus had been in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was the center of things. It was where the temple was. It was where everything went out from Jerusalem. And he'd been in a conversation with some of the leaders, and they were chastising him because his disciples didn't follow all of the purity laws and the hand-washing laws, and that had to do around the table fellowship. And there was very strict rules about who you could share the table with, who you could eat with, and what you had to do to prepare to be able to share the bread with one another. And he tried to open their eyes to a greater perspective and said, it's not about washing your hands. Now, of course, we are alerted to washing our hands now because we're all about washing our hands, but for a different reason. But he said it's not about what goes from the outside in, but it's what comes out of your heart. That's what determines your holiness. That's what determines the value of your life, is what do you do with it from the heart out. And after he has this conversation, then he goes out into away from Jerusalem, into the borderlands. And there would have been Israelites there, but there would have been a lot of people who weren't Israelites, people who weren't of this faith of his. And I don't know why he went out there. Maybe he went out there to rest or to pray or just to get away from the institution of religion. But he went out there with his disciples. And the story goes that there's this woman, and she's a foreigner. She's a Canaanite woman. And the Canaanites and the Israelites had this rift that had been going on for generations, because you see, when the Israelites went into the Promised Land, they battled the Canaanites for this land and defeated them. So I'm sure that there was, a lot of anxiety and antagonistic feelings towards one another. But she sees him, and evidently she's heard about him, and she cries out to him for help. See, she had this child, this daughter, who had been suffering, and the way she put it was that she had been being evilly demonized, and she was suffering greatly. In that time and culture, they believed that illness, any kind of illness, had something to do with a cosmic nature. Either demons were demonizing you and you needed to get the demons out, or you were being punished by God. So she was saying, please help me, we've got this demon. And we don't know if the girl was blind, if she was deaf, if she had seizures, or what sort of way her illness manifested, but we know that she was suffering greatly. Now, this next part is really distressing to me every time that I look at this passage or study this passage. It's that Jesus was silent. He didn't answer her when she put herself down and before him and said, please help me. And then she continued, she persevered, she persisted. And he said something that's so disturbing. He said, it's not ideal to give the bread that's meant for the children to the dogs. Now, dogs at that time weren't the family member that they are for us today. They were dogs. They were considered, they just didn't have the same place that we hold in our families today. So essentially, he was calling her and her child a dog, unworthy of his attention. He said had come only for the Israelites, only for the lost children of Israel. His mission was so focused that in that moment, what he communicated was that my power, my goodness, my message is only for this chosen people, not for everyone. And it wouldn't be right for me to give what is meant for them to people that are not as worthy. Now, that's not the Jesus that we usually talk about, is it? That's not the Jesus who says, love God and love neighbor. That's not the Jesus who talks about the Good Samaritan, the one that was an outsider, that did what none of the insiders would do in caring for someone that needed help. So it's just, it's shocking almost. It's stunning that he would say this to a woman who is so desperately in need of help and believes so fervently that he is the one that can help her. But she continues, she persists, and his disciples are getting aggravated because I'm sure she's wailing and crying, and they just say, they want her dismissed. But at this moment, when he says that about the and there's so much deeper going on here, this table fellowship. Remember, he had just been talking to the Pharisees and religious leaders about lightening up on their exclusion rules. And there he was, essentially doing the same thing. So she says to him, yes, and even the dogs take the scraps from the table. What she is saying to him is that everyone, regardless of their position in society, whether they are accepted or unacceptable, whether they're in or out, whether they're valued or they're considered as a dog, even they are sustained by the power of the same source of sustenance. How brave that was of her, how risky it was of her, how faithful it was of her. And we know from the story that Jesus' eyes were opened, and he says, oh my goodness, what a woman of faith you are. And let it be as you are willing it to be. And her child was healed at that very moment, in that very hour. Now, what are we to do with a story like this? When we have this notion of Jesus being perfect, it says he was fully like human, but he didn't sin. And we have all kinds of ideas of what that might mean. But I would suggest to you that this passage is really meant to be one of great encouragement to us. If you believe that Jesus' only purpose was to sacrifice himself so that after we endure living in this life, we'll go to heaven, then this story might be troublesome and not make sense to you, or you may want to rush to say, well, he knew it all along, he was just testing her. But I say if that's the case, then that's just downright cruel. I mean, she was in pain. But if we believe that part of Jesus' mission was to teach us how to be who we were created to be, to teach us how to be human, then this is a pivotal moment. Because if Jesus is willing to listen and to have his eyes opened in a new way, to see that God's love and power are meant to be for everyone, if Jesus is willing to do that, as Jesus in his full humanity, then there's hope for us as well. And I think we need this kind of hope more now than maybe ever before. You see, we are polarized, we're closed off from one another, our minds are sealed shut, everybody thinks that their perspective is right. But there's hope that if we will open our hearts and our minds to find a way to move where that everyone is included in the mercy, everyone is included in the feeding, everyone is included in the grace, then that'll be a third way forward. And that way will be the way. Will be a way where it's not win or lose, but that all will flourish. All will be forgiven. All will be accepted. That's my prayer right now, is that we as a collective body can have the courage to persist in seeking God's presence in all of this and seeking God's blessings on all. Because that's the only way this thing is going to work. That's the only way we're going to get through this. If we stop fighting each other and we start finding each other. So that's about all I have for this morning. I pray that this week you stay healthy and safe, and that you continue to seek God's presence, and that He meets you right where you are. God bless you, and go in peace.